Comedy is entirely subjective. Whether or not somebody finds something funny can be attributed to a host of different variables about that person and their life. And to me, this also means that the period of time a person is born in can affect what they find funny. Like, old internet memes aren't incredibly funny to me now, but I assume that many people that grew up around the time that they were getting popular still love their I has cheeseburger posts. But I believe it can also work in the opposite direction. Something could be from a different era of the comedic world and still get you real good. Like, for me, I love Abbott and Costello's Who's on First or 7 into 28 Rent sketches. I only chuckle at them at first, but I can never stop thinking about how brilliant their setups and executions are. And that makes me laugh at them and admire them even more. This is all to say that anybody can laugh at almost anything as long as it's in their wheelhouse. But to craft jokes that others will find funny, that will take some careful designing. Now, usually jokes need a couple of things: a setup or execution, then comes the content or progression so the setup can go somewhere or do something, so it can get a little bit of context. And finally, it needs a punchline or subversion of expectations, so the viewer or listener can laugh at it. And that's my extremely limited knowledge of how jokes work. So if we need a setup or for the listener to be in a certain headspace for when we start our funny haha times, what's a good environment to do that? Movies are probably pretty easy, books are free, and even music can sometimes make people laugh consistently. But what about in video games? Video games have that unique trait of players doing what they want that we keep talking about. So how do we make the most of that while trying to implement comedy? In famed Borderlands 2 writer Anthony Burch's game talk, Dying is Funny, Comedy is Easy, he mentions how he used to believe that comedy games worked the following way.
My head was at in terms of humor, a funny game is a game where somebody just says a joke, and you do a thing and then they say another joke.
In fact, that's how all other things that we just mentioned, all other pieces of media, do comedy. The user is on a set path like a roller coaster, and when the author says it's time for a joke, the piece will put them through a loop-de-loop. So, like always, why isn't this a viable solution for us? Well, I believe it's because almost no games are linearly structured. Video games are one of those few mediums where the user has a unique position of having free will over what they experience. Even in most games with a linear story structure, where they go in an area, when they go there, when they jump, how they jump, what sights or people they see and when they see them. It can be difficult to incorporate comedy into games when the player has control of their movement and the person you're trying to tell the joke to can just walk away from you. One way we can try to avoid this as writers is to write specific jokes or quips for specific moments. For example, in the game High on Life, there are these ant-looking alien enemies, and when you're in a gunfight with them specifically, your partner says a line that goes something like, "I've always hated Alien Ant Farm," which is of course a play on words because the player is in a western looking area fighting ants and, well, they're aliens. And there's a band in real life called Alien Ant Farm. This one is just a pun and doesn't really have any meat to it, and is references to pop culture, which can be funny enough. But this happens almost every time you're in a fight with these ants. So the player could potentially hear this joke hundreds and hundreds of times, because there's not that many gunfighting quips. I'm gonna be referencing Dying is Funny, Comedy is Easy a lot more at this point, so I'll just put the quote up when I quote Anthony. How do you balance a running gag with deadpan repetition?
Making dialogue that doesn't stand out so much that you notice it being repeated. But that's kind of the downside of trying to tell a joke, is that if the joke draws enough attention to itself and tries to be like a special thing that you notice, then you will notice it every time and get really sick of it.
And he's of course 200% right. I legitimately stopped playing High on Life after only 3 worlds of playing because the base gameplay loop, and I'm coining this, the comedy loop, were not funny enough or fun enough in my opinion. The time slow gun is really cool, and the platform creation gun is also really cool and fun to use. But some of the real fun stuff and where the game shines is like a lot of traditional media. You walk around, find something to interact with, and hear a written or watch an animated sketch. One situation that comes up is you deciding between just 2 brothers which would get hit on in a bar and listening to them argue about who's uglier. Or one of the TV commercials that they do, like Tammy and the T-Rex. Wait, what's that? Tammy and the T-Rex wasn't just recorded for this game? This is a real movie that they licensed to be in the game? You can watch this entire Z-grade movie fully inside of the game? There's more than one Z-grade movie that you can watch? Okay, so that's the best thing about High on Life, hands down. That and the content that they recorded for the in-game commercials, like I was saying earlier. But for me personally, I can only watch different shades of interdimensional cable so many times before I go, okay, I'm done with this. And almost all of it is nonsense incarnate. High on Life could be more than just funny. It just sucks that the best parts of playing the game are, well, when you aren't playing it. So if we as writers or professional funny people want to go beyond just telling a joke whenever we feel like it's time for the player to hear a joke, how do we design that? Well, since I'm already quoting Anthony and the majority of his talk is about the comedy in Borderlands 2, the gameplay and game feel of that game match the silly tone a bit better than High on Life does. Borderlands has this weapon tree system that lets you become super broken super fast as a character, and in pretty batshit ways. Like, there's this gun where you take out an empty clip and then you throw it as a grenade. Or this power when you're a siren where you can just like pick somebody up and then they go into this weird wobbly space ball thing and then they explode. And then later on you can take that space ball and make sure that it explodes, and then when it explodes it does AoE to enemies nearby and then they explode. These powers and weapons, and ones similar to these, are so off the wall that sometimes when I do them, I just kind of laugh at them. And it's not just the gameplay, there are a ton of quests that are silly too. Like there's this one where you have to assist a wannabe zoologist, and he's trying to rename some of these animals because he doesn't like the name Bullymong, but some of the names are taken and none of the other names really work out. So he just ends up calling them boner farts.
And the reason that Borderlands 2 has a quest about boner farts instead of a quest about saving dying children set to violin music or something like that is because Borderlands 2's gameplay is inherently funny.
So yeah, matching up gameplay with similar comedic themes or actions can bring us closer to games being funny without their jokes having to just be, fed to the player every time they reach a joke checkpoint. So I think we're making some good progress, but now I have one final question to ask because we aren't done yet. What if we wanted the game itself to be funny? Missions and some of the gameplay in Borderlands 2 can be funny, but Anthony Burch himself even admits that there are still some parts of the game that aren't meant to be funny and are supposed to hit you emotionally hard. What if we just wanted a game that was solely made to be comedic? Well, if we wanted to do that, we would be in a great spot by observing and learning from two games that we're about to talk about. The Looker and the Stanley Parable, both for similar but very different reasons. First up, The Looker is a 3D first-person puzzle game parodying The Witness. Now, my feelings aside about this game as a parody piece, The Looker is a genuinely brilliant game when it comes to humor being incorporated to its gameplay loop. Many of the puzzles that you have to solve in The Looker aren't hard, but they can be solved in sometimes very strange and many times hilarious ways. Like, for starters, there are these puzzles with start and end on these panels, and it's a maze in the middle, but there are no borders stopping you from just drawing start to end on the sides of the panel. Or this other puzzle where there's a start but no end, so the player starts drawing and
beep.
Oh.
You're right there. I mean, beep.
Oh. And so yeah, it's like there's somebody standing behind you, looking over your shoulder, playing hot and cold until you find the end marker. And then it's a first-person shooter, and then it's a maze from the Chili's Kids menu, and the game just gets so playful with the way that it subverts the player's expectations in so many different capacities. And finally, the Stanley Parable. This game, in opposition of The Looker, is a completely original game that, what? I'm writing the script right now. What the hell genre of game is this? Hold on, let me see. A 3D narratively driven first-person game. Well, yeah, I guess that sums it up, kind of. The game, its pace, and its gameplay are actually almost entirely dictated by the player. Stanley is a man who's employed at an unnamed company and pushes buttons on a keyboard for a living when he's told to press buttons. Stanley has worked at this company for a number of years, but one day he gets no orders to press any buttons for over an hour. This is where the player comes in and starts controlling Stanley, and you can do whatever you want with him. You can follow the narrator's every command, or you can ignore the narrator's every command. You can lock yourself in a closet, and then you get special dialogue from the narrator for doing so. You can pick up a bucket, take it with you, you'll start talking to it through the narrator, and then the narrator really won't talk to you that much anymore, but he'll start talking through the bucket, or, well, you'll start. Do you get what I'm saying with this yet? These are all mostly empty tasks in terms of gameplay, but all of the comedy and all of the story, the narrative, the sights that you see, everything's driven by the player's actions, and yet almost all of it has unique dialogue. They basically created a new genre and made one of the best games of that genre all at the same time. Absolutely incredible work, amazing work that's influenced so many games up to this point. One small thing with the Stanley Parable is if the player doesn't resonate with or like the narrator's dialogue all that much, it can be hard for them to latch on or be interested in what's going on with the story at all. But from what I've seen, this kind of self-corrects because most people playing it just do the opposite of what the narrator is saying. So if they don't like it, they just do something else or do a different thing instead of stop playing the game entirely. And again, that's genius. What I've learned from writing this video and what I hope comes across well is that I believe one of the best ways that we can add comedy to games that would be unique to games is to keep the player guessing by giving them a lot of freedom in their actions and then having the game's systems, stories, characters, and dialogue react in really interesting and unique ways to the way that the player is reacting to that initial system. The Stanley Parable's writers essentially made the player part of the comedy sketch. And that's one of the coolest sentences I think I've ever said about a comedy game. And it makes me excited for other new comedy games that might come out because the Stanley Parable came out like 10 years ago, but just got a new deluxe version. And The Looker just came out last year. And both of those games are two of the funniest games I think me or some of my friends have ever played. It is crazy. I used to hate both of these games, but there's just so much work and love put into both of them that upon revisiting them, they just pop so much more than any other comedy game that I've played in recent memory. And they're so important to this topic. So yeah, go play them. I mean, High on Life is still pretty funny, and I think if you like Rick and Morty at all, you'll probably get more enjoyment out of it than I do. I like Rick and Morty, it's a lot, and I don't like the gameplay. But Borderlands 2, definitely The Looker, and definitely the Stanley Parable. Go play them. Because if you stayed this long and you aren't going to play them, I don't know, I'll feel bad. I'll feel bad for wasting your time. I'll feel like a giant cop